Hey everyone, we are excited to launch the Bright Mind subscription. Unlimited access to all of our CE courses, webinars, and expert speakers all in one place.
And for a limited time for the month of December, you can get 50% off. Normally $299 a year, now just $149 for your first year.
That's unlimited CE on your schedule for half price.
Head over to psychedpractice.com and click sign up, and the discount is already applied. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be well, stay psyched. This episode of the Psyched to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives. Welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one-stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me as always,
Ray Christner.
And before we get to today's topic, we wanted to do some housekeeping. So we're excited to announce that we have 2 live CE webinars to add to our Psyched to Practice library. On Friday, March 27th, 2026 at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, Ray will be presenting Same Symptoms, Different Stories, Differentiating Neurodevelopmental and Emotional Disorders. And on Friday, April 17th, 2026 at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time, I will be presenting Automate the Audit, Building Sustainable Symptoms for ADHD Success. Head over to www.psychedpractice.com to register.
Next, we're excited to announce that we will have a booth this year at NASP 2026 in Chicago from February 25th to February 27th. Unfortunately, Paul won't be able to make the trip, but I'll be there along with Dan Florell and others from the Psyched to Practice team. If you're there at the conference, be sure to check out my presentation, Exploring the Emotional Disturbance Multiverse, Practical Assessment and Support on February 24th at 4 p.m. and catch Dan's presentation, With Great AI Powers Comes Great Responsibility on February 24th at 1 p.m.
I'm sad to be missing it for sure, but please be sure to stop by and say hello, grab some merch, and have the opportunity to win some discounts on our CEU site if you're at the convention. And, speaking of NASP, please stop by PAR's booth at NASP as well. PAR has been sponsoring the Psyched to Practice podcast for some time now. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar, PAR is a psychological assessment developer that's been supporting the mental health community for over 45 years. They offer a variety of tools and services to those in the mental health community. And I know I really appreciate that. And I know I really appreciate the opportunity to have given a PAR talk on adult ADHD. And Ray, I know that you've done quite a few PAR talks as well.
Yeah. And also be sure to check out their booth on the 25th from 4 to 5 p.m., where I'll be answering some questions about the new test that I'm developing with PAR and can give a lot of information about what we're doing.
And with that, let's get into today's topic. Yeah. And, today I think we have a really kind of interesting topic because, I don't know that there's a single person that hasn't experienced it, yet we don't usually kind of vocalize. We don't talk about it. And that's this experience of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been, following some of these Facebook groups for psychologists and school psychologists, and more and more, maybe without naming it imposter syndrome, I hear people discussing the feelings behind it and this idea of, are they in the right place? Did they pick the wrong career? Are they a fake? Did they learn? And all of these pieces. And, I think you're right. I think probably most professionals experience it. Sometimes we experience, I think, in other parts of our lives, parents experience it. I think there's a lot of different ways, but from a professional standpoint, I think a lot of people go through it, but we don't always talk about it. And, my thoughts is I think sometimes that maybe makes it worse for us. So.
Absolutely. And, one of the pieces about this conversation that I really liked it when kind of brainstorming is it's not a bad thing. And kind of like, I think typically when we think of imposter syndrome, it's like, oh, this is a negative and I can't wait to not feel like an imposter, or there's something wrong if I'm feeling like an imposter. And that means I'm not competent and I'm not able to. And like, we can really just undermine a lot of our, areas of expertise or areas of experience there. And really being able to reframe some of our views of like, when we're feeling that, maybe it's a sign that we need to improve competency or lean in. Maybe it's us caring about what we're doing and wanting to make sure that we're able to perform well. And, if we're seeing some resistance or challenges and we don't experience like only success, then we might internalize that a little bit.
Yeah. I definitely think it can get negative, for people, but I love the idea of, how do we use this as a reframe? And again, I think there's all kinds of moments that we go through. Like when I was thinking about the topic, it was interesting when I was finishing my doctoral degree, and I was talking to somebody who, after I was done, they said, "Have you had the dream yet?" And I'm like, "Dream? Like, what's the dream?" And they're like, "Oh, wait, like you're going to have this dream. Like you're going to get up panicked in the middle of the night. And you're going to have a dream that like you went through all this work and then somebody comes to you and says, oh, hey, you missed one class. You really don't have a doctorate or you really. And it was funny because I laughed about it. And then about 2 or 3 weeks afterward, like I had the dream. Like I had this thing where I went, like, I got up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really crazy. So, I shared it with a friend of mine and said, oh my gosh, like I had this dream. And he went, oh yeah, like I had the same thing. And then the more I talked to people about it, the more people were like, oh yeah, like I had it after I graduated high school. Like I thought they were going to come back and tell me like, oh no, I really didn't finish. And I was like, wow, it's interesting. Like we hit this point of success and then we fear that we're not good enough. And essentially, I think it is maybe a form of how imposter syndrome comes out.
Yeah.
Maybe in a more unconscious way. But yeah, so did you have the dream?
I've had the dream a few different ways. But,
a few different ways. Oh, wow.
But what's funny is like actually it was one of my first jobs, which has nothing to do with mental health. I was working in it was a tree and shrub nursery, and I'd just gotten hired and I was working in the nursery. So I had to, be informed about all sorts of bushes and trees and things like that. I think I was just graduated high school. So I had no idea what I was doing. And there's this guy who would walk up and he's like, all right, I have 2 pieces of advice for you. He's like, get sunglasses that people can't see your eyes with. And then when you sit there, get used to looking at them and glancing down and read the sign to them. He's like, you're going to fake it till you make it and you actually know what you're talking, like until if you're there. And it's like, I remember that so vividly. And that's what I did until then. It got to the point where I didn't have to fake it. And it's like, hey, if I'm looking for something that's being this. And it's like, okay, well, what's the soil type? That's clay. What's the sunlight? How well does it drain? All right, these are your options. These are going to do well. If you go over here, it looks nice, but it's going to die on you. And it's like,
right.
And I didn't really notice that transition of like, I knew what I was talking about, but I kept fake it till you make it, fake it till you make it. And there's, I don't necessarily endorse that in all areas, but there's a healthy risk taking.
Sure.
Is I think an important element, and it invites in imposter syndrome, but I think it's also how we don't feel stagnant. We don't feel like we're just being complacent in a certain area.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it's like, and I think it's important to kind of note, like when we talk about this idea of imposter syndrome, it really is not usually about lack of ability, though. It really isn't that's not usually the case. I mean, most of the time, people who have it are very competent in what they do, maybe at differing levels, like your first few years. And I think that's very normal. But it really is about this idea of a mismatch, right? Like the mismatch between internally how we feel and what we show externally. And so there's this, I think this congruent kind of mindset that happens. So we feel like we fake it. And it's, in a profession like mental health, I think that's scary for some of us. I think to be like, did I say the right thing? Did I do? And, I see that in supervision. Like when I supervise people, like say 98% of the time, they are spot on. Like they've done it really well, but they don't feel that internally. And they question, did I make the right recommendation? Did I do the right thing, parents or for kids or whoever? And, and then usually in supervision, I'm like, yeah, like that's great. Like that's and then you see this like relief that kind of comes. But then the next scenario, it comes right back. Yeah. It repeats itself.
And I think, there's an element of that, like it's that reassurance seeking element of it. And there is a lot of value in getting that comfort, but it's also, we need to be able to start generating that language for ourselves.
Sure.
Not to challenge it outright, I think, but to recognize and working to tolerate the discomfort and, hey, maybe I said the right thing. Maybe I didn't. I don't know, but I'm going to explore, I'll see how things go. I'll see what the thoughts are the next time we're meeting and things like that. And we can take it from there. So we're not kind of catastrophizing. And I think a lot at times imposter syndrome really lives in that, that black and white, that all or nothing of, did you do the right thing? When I know I talk to my clients a lot and say, like, I think there's very few times where there is a right answer and a wrong answer. There might be a better answer and one that's a better fit or a worse fit, but to really distill it down to the right thing. Yet I think we sometimes hold ourselves to that level. And if we're, because we don't know, and so a lot of ways we won't ever know. So we then are left with that uncertainty and we seek that reassurance at times.
And now a word from our sponsor. PAR's AI Report Writer is an AI-boosted tool that generates comprehensive reports, including interpretations and recommendations based on scores from a wide range of popular assessment tools. Spend less time on report writing and more time supporting students. Learn more at parinc.com/AI. That is parinc.com/AI. And now back to our conversation.
I think you're right. I mean, there's a level of maybe perfectionism, but it is. It's this idea that we want to be right all the time, and we're just not. We're in a human field where we're doesn't mean we're going to be wrong, but maybe it doesn't work, or maybe it's just not the right thing at the moment. And I think that's that's scary for people. I think we live in a society now that we're worried that our thoughts are going to be challenged, that we're going to maybe say it the wrong way, or we're not going to say what people want us to say. And I think that creates just a whole other level. I see that now, even with myself. Like I know, like I'm going to go into some meetings and somebody's not going to be happy. Like it's not, but that doesn't change my opinion. I still have to follow along. But I think that's harder. And I think, different levels of our career, it's harder. It's easier for me now toward the end than it was in my first 5 years.
Yeah.
First 5 years, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want, anybody to disagree with me. But it's a reality. I mean, it's just part of, I think, the job. But it's hard. I think it's hard for people. And I think when we think about this, a couple of things I just want to mention. One is, we're calling it a syndrome. This is not a diagnosis, but it's not in DSM. It's not in ICD. So we call it that. I mean, as more of a pop kind of psychology term. But a couple of things. I think it can be context dependent, and I think which is really important. Like there are people who I think can feel competent in one area and then feel this mismatch occurring in another area. And that it can show up at different times. Like, I think for me, I know it happened in times throughout my career. Like maybe I got a new position or I took on a new role, transitions that happen, just in general. Or, even just high stakes environments, we're in a situation which, the us being seen as a professional is a higher risk, So I'll give an example. I just was talking to somebody just this morning, and she's going to do her first professional presentation at a big conference. And her freaking out is probably that's probably minimizing how stressed out she was.
Yeah.
And, it's very high stakes for her. First time she's getting a chance to do it, and she's going, why am I doing this? I can't, I'm not the person to be up there. And, and I laughed and I went, oh yeah, I remember doing that. I made me actually think of, I don't know if you remember when we had Bob Friedberg on many years ago.
Yeah.
And, he talked about doing a presentation and Aaron Beck walking in the room. And all of a sudden, this guy who had written numerous journal articles and books and was at that point in time the CBT guy for children and adolescents, his first thought was, oh my gosh, I'm screwing up his therapy. Imposter syndrome. I mean, I think it's exactly kind of what we're talking about. I don't know if Bob would call it that, but when he said it, and in talking to this lady today, I went like, oh yeah. And I told her that story. I said, listen, this guy was, I used to idolize him at that point in time. And then to hear him say I stood there and worried if I was doing it right, or if it was really humbling for me, really kind of.
And, it's funny because when you just mentioned that about her experience, I know it's been a little bit now, but when I've, gave I would say kind of my first presentation for PAR, there was that feeling there. And it was just like I'm hearing we have 800 people. I was like, wow. And there was this awareness of I do the podcast,
right?
And we're going to be on video, and I'm going to be the talking primarily. But I was like, those skills should transfer fairly well. And it felt like in the moment, dry mouth, I was like, man, this is really challenging. And it was something where it was a sense of self-doubt, and being able to get some immediate feedback, sharing I think it went well, but I don't even know because I don't have a point of comparison in a way. And so, but also who am I to share and talk about ADHD? And then that thought also, I was like, well, no, I know quite a bit, but lived experience as well as, looking and just trying to, absorb as much information that's out there as I can about it. It's okay, I do have the knowledge. I just need to be the mouthpiece for this knowledge. And so being able to challenge, but that really shook me up, leading up to that conversation that was there. And it was helpful in a way. So I know I mentioned that trying performance anxiety when we were talking about the social anxiety element, but I think certainly, imposter syndrome, I think is not always tangled with social anxiety, but I think it's a common, or maybe performance anxiety, but I think it's a common place for it to exist.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it definitely, there's an anxiety piece. And I think the interesting part though is when I hear people talk about it and they talk about it in kind of a negative way, one of the things I had read a while back that I thought was really interesting on the topic is that it's more common in people, in professionals specifically, that are competent, conscientious, and reflective. So all really good traits, right? We all want to think we're competent, conscientious, and reflective. But those positive traits in us are the same reasons why we do have that performance anxiety, or we do have this idea of an imposter syndrome. And, so, I know we're going to kind of get to this, but I think that's why it's so important to kind of reframe it.
Yeah.
And, I have, full transparency throughout my career. I've had times of it. But I never looked at it in a negative way. I always looked at it as a sign of my growth, which I thought was important. As I shared with all here before we started, I actually Monday had a very real imposter syndrome experience. And it was because I got an invitation to this dinner that's coming up at a conference soon. And I looked at the guest list, and the guest list were all people who I admire their work. They're incredible test developers. And I know why I'm invited, because I'm developing a test that's going to be, part of this kind of family of tests through PAR. And I looked at the list and went, holy shit, why am I on this list? And I, for a moment, I remember just kind of, almost panicking and, kind of going through this thought of I don't belong. They're these are people who are I look up to with the utmost respect professionally. And it didn't last long. It may have lasted maybe 5 minutes. But it was enough where I went wait a second. Okay, I know why I'm with them. And I can't wait to learn from them. And it's a great place that I'm at. And I'm there because I've challenged myself to do something new. And yes, I don't know as much as they do. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's what's great about interacting with them. And, and I say this after doing, practicing for 30 years, and still there's these moments. And, again, maybe initially it didn't feel good, but then it was yeah, this is okay. I am supposed to be part of this. This is something that's really good. It is the trajectory of my career. And I think that's important for all of us. No matter if you're in, first or second year, or if you're in your 25th or 30th year, I think that those moments, if we pause for a second and recognize, if we didn't take challenges and try something new and stretch ourselves, we wouldn't have those moments.
Yeah.
Because there are things I could do that I'm not going to get much imposter syndrome with at this point in time. So reframing, I think, is super important.
And, I absolutely love that point of really, I don't know that it's impossible. I think it's just challenging for us to have that sense of imposter syndrome when we also feel complacent. And so maybe even the idea of the lack of imposter syndrome might be a signal for complacency, and might be a signal then, okay, would it be helpful at this point to take on a challenge? And, that doesn't mean we need to constantly be, exhausting ourselves, ride the plateau when you can, but when's the next climb? Because I think that's when that's growing. We're stepping outside of that comfort zone. We're developing further tolerance for that uncertainty, and, and being able to, just taking more under our belt. And there's a quote. It's probably my favorite quote. We've been tasked to do certain things. It's the one I always hang up, by Marianne Williamson. And I think I probably have even shared it here on the podcast before, but it's our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. And, I love this quote for a number of different reasons, but as we were talking, it was just gnawing at the back of my head. I was our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful. And we fear that sense of and I don't know that it's unhealthy, to fear wielding power. And, I think that's a good measure of those who are growing. And, I want there to be, trepidation. I don't want someone who's not going to be cautious and throw, I got this. I want someone to be diligent and thoughtful. And I think that comes from in some ways, a fear of being powerful, or a fear of being being seen in a certain way.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I in a very simple way, the person I was talking to about the presentation she's doing, I said to her, listen, this is a signal, not a flaw. To really distill it down to something really basic, it's you're feeling this way, not because you don't belong and you shouldn't do it. You're feeling this way because you're stretching yourself. to take a challenge and to do something maybe you're new. And I think I'd like the quote you gave, I think is great because it reflects that. Wouldn't feel that way if we just lived in doing nothing. So, I mean, it really is this idea of, and I think sometimes people are hesitant to use words like feeling power. I think it's really important. Like, I mean, I do think it's something where it's like, we shouldn't minimize that. It's okay to feel that way. And it's not the same as arrogance. So, I mean, I think there's a real difference. It can turn into that, but no, I love that quote. I think that's really a good way to look at it.
Channel our inner He-Man. We have the power.
The inner He-Man. I love it.
And, I think another aspect of this that's really important is when you were talking about the dream.
Yeah.
And, you had someone who came and mentioned it to you. You had it. And you went and mentioned it. Oh, yeah, I have had that.
Yeah.
And, oh, yeah, I have had that. And I think oftentimes there's a sense of shame in this thought and in this self-doubt that keeps us quiet. We don't vocalize it. And I think, talking about it as this signal that, I do love this reframe of viewing it really in a way that can recognize, growth, recognize, responsibility, integrity. I think it can start to have more significant negative effect if we don't verbalize it. And if we don't, if we let the shame have us, just kind of dwelling in it, and really kind of maybe cutting down or challenging our own accomplishments and really being dismissive in a way where we don't really then ever recognize it as imposter syndrome. It's just a belief about ourselves and our inability or incompetence and just really good at faking everyone else out. And that's the only thing we're competent in is being, deceptive. And really how when we can verbalize it, brings an awareness to that, and that it really we get feedback. We can also look for evidence. There's a difference that's there, I think.
I mean, I like that you mentioned the idea of shame and shame and silence. I mean, I think those two things together, because I don't know where I've heard it before, but this idea that shame thrives when doubt stays internal. So this idea that, the more we just kind of keep it in and don't externalize it, the more it will eat at us. And, hey, we all know our thoughts are powerful, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's, we know that we can put ourselves into these spinning kind of thoughts. So, I mean, I think people assume they're the only ones that feel this way. I mean, I think one of the reasons I was really glad we were talking about this today is I think for many professionals, they think they're the only one going through it. And I'm going to say, I mean, I know we can't say all people, but I'm going to say the majority have gone through it on some level. And, I know for me, it's waxed and waned. And, luckily I found a way early in my career to reframe it. But I also talk about it still today, the situation with the dinner I was talking about. When I felt that way, I immediately went into my wife's office who works at my practice and I went like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I had this thought. And she just kind of looked at me like, why did you? And I'm like, I don't know. For a moment I went in it and, but I externalized it. I didn't, even though I was kind of beyond it at that point, I think I also needed to say it out loud. I think that was important. So, I think talking about it's important and finding ways or people that we can talk to.
Yeah. And in some ways, and this is probably convoluted, when we verbalize, I think we turn it into really being anything and only being one thing. And so the example of if you have a birthday gift, like a bag, and, it's sitting there and you have anything that can fit in that bag is in that bag until you open it. And so we can let any belief or any thought be true until we verbalize it. And then we can start to interact with it. And I think it's at that point we can start looking for that evidence. And, when we don't, when there is that, the shame and the silence, I think it also festers some of those assumptions we make about ourselves, whether they're
emotionally driven or cognitively driven. Like it's, we don't really have a sounding board or something to reflect off of it. And so they can just go and, run rampant. But, again, it's the shining the light on it, really kind of, putting it out there. And then we can start pulling in and be like, well, actually, no, I do belong. Or no, I am doing okay. And like, it can be either, or that recognition of, I'm growing, like I'm not expected to have like this all figured out. This is still a new development for me. So whatever that experience or insight that it can bring, I think we need that duality piece of it, because if it's not shared, then it just runs rampant there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then our thoughts, go into, I think, we kind of earlier, maybe I said the word perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's easy then for us to get into those thoughts, these ideas of, if I really were good at my job, it would be easy. No, it's not. It never is. It's hard. Being in mental health is difficult. Working as, a psychologist, a counselor, social worker, it's hard work. It's taxing work. And I think there's a difference between it being easy and being satisfying. I think most of my days are days. Like it's different hard. Like I'm not dealing with the hard that somebody who's roofing a house has to, but it's a different hard.
Yeah.
But it's exhausting, and it's, but it's satisfying. And I think it's again, kind of that change, or, I think the other thing, like the perfectionism, people will be like, well, I made a mistake. That means I shouldn't be in this career. Hell, I should have been out of the career a whole long time ago, because I've made a ton. We're not always going to get it right. We're going to have people that we see that don't benefit from our service. That doesn't mean we didn't try hard and we didn't know our things, but we can't do it. We're not the right fit for everyone, or maybe we do miss a diagnosis. That's being human. Doctors do it. Counselors do it. Auto mechanics do it. It doesn't mean that they're not good. It means they're human. And I know we all know these things, but I think it's easy when it's us and it's our profession that we forget. Yes, we're not going to. We're going to make mistakes. That doesn't mean we do harm. It just means that it's not perfect.
And, I think, I don't know that we're the most, but I think, mental health professionals are uniquely positioned to be at a higher risk, because I think one of our roles is oftentimes to challenge imposters. And, the individual you're working with, like being able to recognize that. And so if I'm this source of wisdom that's, working to impart this message, and if I have doubt, then does that undermine me? Do I actually know what I'm talking about? And so am I even qualified to be giving this? And so, when we hear it and we can see it so clearly in others, but if it's hard to see in ourselves of like, how we have it wrong, it's easy to be like, got this. But if we can't say that to ourselves with that same conviction, it must mean we don't. Yet others can look at our, our work, like you're talking about in supervision, and say, no, you got it. It's just that difference in terms, again, verbalizing it and putting it out there. Our clients are doing that. We do a great job, being able to reframe and to recognize. It's just when we're not talking about it because we're worried it undermines our own ability. And, I think that can really be challenging there.
I think that's a great point. I think that, I don't know. I think if I tell people that I see, I'm far from being, flawless. It's, I think about Al Ellis and, his work when he would, talk about being a fallible human being, and this idea that we're all fallible. That always stuck with me. And I think maybe why for me it's easier to be a little resilient around it is I always recognize that, like, and I'm okay with mistakes. In fact, like when I do therapy, I disclose that up front. Like, we're going to get some of it wrong. It's not going to just be this perfect because you're here. We're going to see progress every time you come in. Like, it's going to ebb and flow. I'm going to have you try something. It's not going to work. And I might ask you to try something and it makes it worse. Yeah. We may come up with something that, and that's part of the process. And I think maybe if we focused on getting the process right, that's important. Like, I like to get the process right. I'm going to make mistakes, and the people I see are going to make mistakes, and they're fallible, and so am I. And I just always view things like that. Like, I mean, it's, hey, I've had people that they've been perfect sessions. We've made wonderful progress, and man, sometimes they're just not. It's so I think again, it's kind of the reframe of just because we're in this field doesn't mean we have to have our shit together all the time.
And I want to extend that for just a moment in our personal lives too. And I think, if there's any mental health professionals out there who, if you struggle with anxiety or depression, or, if there's things that are going on and you feel like, I know this, why am I affected by this? Like, I think that can be a huge source of, that imposter syndrome element. And, in part, I recognize, like, I work with a lot of individuals with ADHD. Being an individual with ADHD myself, my time management is like, I mean, it is not, like, I was late running in today because, I was like, I lost track of the time there, and I was really, fixated. We went on a tangent. It's like, so those things can happen. And if we view that as, oh, I'm not capable or competent, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice, because also what's the message we're sharing? It's more, and how do we work to practice that sense of self-acceptance, understanding, recognizing truly what it is versus just that surface thought of judgment that we want it. We almost kind of want it to be that, because it can take some of the pressure off, but it's like, no, I do got this. I can be successful again. Who am I to be? Who are you not to be? Like in that way.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying about the personal life. It made me think. When early in my career, I was a psychologist before I was a parent. So I'd run these parent programs. I was doing all this stuff and thought I knew like a lot, and I did. I mean, I knew enough. Then I remember like having my first child, and who was really easy actually, but I remember losing it for the first time as a parent, where I just got frustrated and kind of lost it. And I remember at that moment going, oh, are people listening to me? Like, what? Like, yeah, I just did this. And I remember having to step back and go like, wait a second, just because I'm in that profession doesn't mean I'm never going to make a bad decision as a parent, or regret maybe how I handled a situation. And I remember that being the first time I was kind of like, yeah. And actually reflecting on it, it made me better working with parents. It made me like that. Initially, I thought that was a bad thing. And in the end, I kind of went like, wow, being a parent, I learned a lot that I maybe, books never taught, but it was really great for me to kind of have that experience. But again, it's a reframe. It was something I had to get back to.
And, maybe one last piece here before we start pulling back, reminded, and this was a callback from another previous episode of our cognitive bias episode. And I'm thinking specifically the functional attribution error and that tendency to make, attribution statements compared to conditional or circumstantial. And, I think there's an element of that also in this, where we take conditional moments and we make attribution statements about our ability and our success in a way, or our inability to be successful. And yet we look at others and we give, this is the reason why, and here's the condition, here's the circumstance that's important or impactful there. So,
I think it's all of it's a bias. Yeah. It really is. It's, but I think that's a good point. So I guess with the pullback here, what's your thoughts on we've kind of maybe talked a little bit about what we do, but so for people going through this in their careers, some tips maybe that you would give? I have some thoughts of my own, but things that we would say, hey, if you're experiencing this.
Yeah. I would say one thing that comes is like, speak it out and like, don't let shame keep you silent, because, that's, if there's no footing in silence and shame, we need that duality of speaking it out, I think is an important one.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's a big one. I think whether it's to a spouse, a colleague, whoever, somebody to say it. And I think even self-talking it out and just saying like, wait, this is just my imposter voice kind of tricks on me right now, and calling it for what it is. And again, I've had times I've done that and went, no, maybe there was a mistake I do need to do some more work on. But most of the time when it happens, it really is just something we just have to either external to ourselves or to somebody else. I like that one. That's a good one.
And, one other one that comes to mind is this idea, like, even just as you said, like, we need to be willing to learn and not expect perfection, and so if it is, that's wonderful. We just grew, and viewing it as that opportunity and really prioritizing that learning element of it versus just holding these black and white perfectionistic expectations that really can be so limiting.
Yeah, I like that. I kind of redefine that in this idea of like refining what belonging means in our careers.
Yeah.
And like, belonging doesn't mean I'm perfect. Like, I don't belong as a mental health professional for making a mistake. I belong because I like learning, like contributing. I show up. I like helping people, whatever it is. Like, it's again kind of just a way we redefine those kind of thoughts. And it is important to recognize that sometimes that learning means there's mistakes. Yeah, it goes together. The other thing I think I would kind of mention is this idea of recognizing that feelings don't equal facts, and making sure, like, kind of thinking of it from like a reattribution kind of technique. When we have those thoughts, just asking ourselves, like, what is the actual evidence either for or against the thought that I don't belong?
Yeah.
It's easy to have one bad situation and then we don't think we belong, and minimize the fact that there were 100 really good ones that kind of happened. I had a colleague I was talking to last week who had a really bad parent meeting, just went sideways. And he's like, I don't know if I belong in this profession. And I'm like, how many times have you had parents thank you? He's like, on a ton of times. Let's focus on those. Feeling, in fact, that, weren't there. But then also, like, how would I evaluate that belief if another professional? So when I was talking to him, it's easy for me to say, wait a second, do this. But sometimes our own self-talk, we have to say, okay, what if a colleague of mine would have had this thought? What would we have said to them? So, simple things we tell other people to do, we can do them on our own.
Practice what we preach.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, I hope this episode got you thinking about, like, maybe just some of those inner voices, and really viewing it as a signal, not, taking it as gospel or fact, and just being able to reframe some of this and, embrace the learning, embrace the growing. And, I think that is how we, we don't beat imposter syndrome, we grow with it. And, viewing it in that way, that it's helpful and it's valuable. It's not perfect, but, we're not perfect. So that's a good thing.
That's right.
But with that, hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.